Coming up in this episode.
Think of how many men are dying from suicide every year. That is so unnecessary, you know. People, especially men, find it really hard to reach out for support. So how do we acknowledge that actually, yes, it is our responsibility. You know, we want our employees to be working to their full potential. Then we also need to know that they're not just a robot.
So for me, I was brought up on conversation as the way of, you know, sharing ideas and exploring and all of the beautiful things that I think conversation brings. And I realized that some years ago, that in order to come back to myself and who I am, I need to bring that back into my life. And this is why the show was born. But really,
perfectionism is such a joy hooverer, because nothing is going to be perfect, because my perception of perfection is going to be different from yours. So
the Founders Unplugged podcast, hosted by Greg McCallum. Raw, uncensored conversations with startup founders.
Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. Let me just turn you up.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, sorry. I was just doing all of the technical things I needed to do before starting to open my mouth. So sorry about that.
That's
but
okay.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
How have you been since we last spoke?
Yeah, okay. Just busy trying to get shit sorted out, and yeah, you know what it's like. Founders life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing, though, isn't it? It's like knowing what to spend the time on that's going to give you the return on investment. So putting the time in things and finding out it didn't work or whatever, it can feel like a kick in the teeth. But at the end of the day, like, you know, there's always something you can take from it.
Yeah, definitely.
Been through it now, I know how that process works. Like there's a way of spinning it, isn't there?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, every day is a school day for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially in what we do. Well, look, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. So yeah, like I said, we have hit record. We already started. I'd like to just get straight into it. Like there's very little ceremony here, apart from one thing that I do ask from my guests to do, and this is the only thing I'll ask of you. Well, actually, maybe something small at the end, but it's what I ask everyone to do, which is just introduce yourself, introduce your business, and then while you're talking on the screen, I'm going to be sharing your LinkedIn profile and your website. So you know you can explain as much or as little as you like about yourself and your business. It's entirely up to you. So over to you.
Cool. Hi everyone. My name is Teresa Clark, and I'm the founder and the alchemist of the Wellness Revolution. And we're a culture and employee wellbeing company, reimagining the workplace to unleash potential. My background's in mental health. I spent 12 years working for the NHS and charity sector before setting up the business in 2019. And basically, I think that the business world has the power to be a very powerful catalyst for social change, and that promoting healthier and happier workplaces is the way that we can kind of really help people manage their well-being and perform at their best.
Very good. Oh, sorry, I just realized I had all my messages open when I was sharing the screen. Not a good look. It does that every time you open a tab, doesn't it? I think, which is really annoying. Oh no, it didn't do it that time. Okay, it was just that. Yeah. Why alchemist?
So yeah, everybody always asks me that question, and it seems a bit mystical.
Yeah.
Basically, the explanation is that alchemists are or were, back in olden times, people that transformed energy, and I feel that that's something that really resonates with me, because I've had quite a traumatic background myself, which led me to go into working in mental health. So I've kind of like transformed myself from the inside out, and that's what I do in workplaces, is help workplaces transform culture to support well-being and
you transform that negative energy into positive energy.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, I like it. It's nice to see people having a bit of fun with their title on LinkedIn for a change.
I mean, it's just a bit boring, the usual stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, I like it. It's very good. So yeah, tell me a bit more about how this started. You mentioned obviously your journey through the NHS, working in what were you doing specifically there? What type of individuals were you working with? Was this children and young people? Was it the elderly? Was there a focus there, or was it a bit more broader than that?
Yeah, I actually worked with people with severe and enduring mental health conditions that ended up in secure units when they committed offences. So I spent many years working in that field with, I started working with offenders in the beginning, and then kind of went into designing sort of service design and delivery on scale. So I worked for Barnet Enfield and Haringey Mental Health Trust, and used to first I started working outreach in the community, helping people to rehabilitate when they were discharged from hospital. And then and I also, during that time, I was a trustee for an amazing charity called Key Changes that promote positive mental health through music. So they helped people to kind of overcome challenges, or just kind of find, I think the thing is with mental health is that when we're affected by that, we really lose belief in ourselves. And so if you think of those people that I used to work with, they have so much stigma attached. Not only do they have mental health condition, but they also have a criminal conviction. So it's very difficult to kind of believe that your life can improve when you have the sort of weight of those things and how society views that. So it's obviously very difficult for people to get jobs, but not even just, you know, for them to get an interview, but for them to sort of have the skills because they've been in hospital for a long time. So it's really about kind of like finding that thing in that person that, you know, makes their eyes sparkle, and then really kind of, you know, working with them to build that self-belief. Because if we believe in ourselves, we can do anything, but obviously self-belief is affected by so many different things. So that's really the work that I kind of built on. And then with Key Changes, that was just like an amazing example of how music and creativity can really just sort of, you know, bring passion back to people's lives. And when they're starting to engage in something that really, you know, sets the fire inside them, then it kind of impacts all areas of their life.
Sorry, just really quickly, you made me think of something, which is I'm a huge believer in the creative outlets, even for people, because there are a lot of people that you speak to, they're like, oh, you know, I'm not creative. Like, everyone's creative, in my opinion. And I think even and you know, two of the best things I think someone can do if they're feeling a bit there, you know, in a dark place in their life, is one, exercise. That's a bit of a no-brainer if you can. Not possible for everyone though, so you've got to bear that in mind. And the other is find a creative outlet, even if you don't think you're creative, give it a go, because it's amazing. It's amazingly therapeutic, whether that's writing something or just, you know, scrawling on a piece of paper, getting some clay. There's something about it that uses our brain in a way that we don't often use. If that's not your thing, that seems to really be quite therapeutic.
Well, it kind of is my thing, actually, because creativity is one way that we can really build resistance, because as you say, when we're being creative, we're actually using a different part of our brain. So it makes us more resilient to stress, because it enables us to have a different outlet and to build different neural pathways that have a huge benefit in so many areas. So actually part of the work that we do, the Wellness Revolution, is a lot around creativity and like whatever.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting.
Like, because creativity, and also, you know, for businesses to be successful, we need to have people being creative and innovative. And so we have to kind of be very intentional about how we create environments, because if people are super stressed and they've got huge workloads, then the creativity outlet goes down by a huge percentage. So it's really kind of thinking about how you kind of enable people to be creative and create space for that, and the things that kind of, you know, can tap into that, like team building activities where you're just actually having fun together rather than, you know, coming together for a specific work thing. You know, those types of activities and shared experiences are really powerful in actually creating environments that do promote well-being.
I saw a study, saw a talk from someone a while ago now, a psychologist, I think it was, talking about the importance of play in our lives as a whole, and you know, from childhood all the way up into adulthood, and how the fact that when play sort of dissipates throughout our lives in adulthood, as we see it as childish, that has severe negative impacts on the way that we maintain relationships and can make new relationships and develop our brain and all that kind of stuff. And especially for things like creativity, focus, overall well-being and happiness, hugely important. And so it's not enough to just go, oh yeah, well, we do staff drinks every Friday. It's like, yeah, but what are you doing when you're there? Like, are you putting activities together? Are you encouraging people to compete with one another and form teams and have fun? You know what I mean? And apparently there's well, you would probably know better than I do, an enormous amount of psychology behind the reasons why that's incredibly important and healthy.
Yeah, well, if you think, we all have an inner child, we neglect that. And I think when we get to adulthood, we totally forget about it. But actually, if your inner child is being neglected, then you're not actually functioning fully as an adult either. And I think I want to sort of go back to a point that you made about old team drinks, like why still our kind of workplaces revolving around, having alcohol as an element. Because actually that's something that we really need to like tackle, I think, as well, because
it is moving away from that.
We are moving away, but I think there is still some shifts that need to be made there, because alcohol shouldn't be perceived as a way that we play. I mean, it might be for some people, but there's lots of other ways that you can foster that same energy without introducing alcohol.
The problem is that becomes the focal point. That's the problem.
Totally.
And it's like we're going for drinks.
It's a bit lazy, really.
It is. Yeah, it is. It's like we're going for drinks as opposed to we're going to go and play pool and we might have a couple of drinks while we're there. Like there's a very different sort of elements to that. It's like that's the main point of why we're going, not anything else. Yeah. It's super interesting. And you have a background in the creative arts, as I remember, right? So you have a creative background yourself. So what kind of creativity do you explore as hobbies and things like that?
So my background is in printed textiles. So I used to be a printer back in the day, many years ago. And the way that I have like several different creative outlets these days. I mean, I don't print anymore. I would maybe like to go back to that when I've retired or something. But I do. Like I love
in like the screen printing.
Screen printing.
So I used to love that because I went to art college and
did you?
I dropped out. But
I was in print for fashion, so I sort of specialised in like women's wear.
Oh wow.
And it was like a really cool degree actually, because it's very scientific. So you used to like make all your own dyes, and there was lots of like different printing techniques. So it was like quite. So
you have to learn the chemistry of it as well.
You have to learn the chemistry of it as well. So it was really, really interesting. But my creative outlets now is like I really like to write, and actually I really like creating content, because I think for me I still get to use my design background with that, and I think for me that's like a really nice way, because I sort of thought for a long time, especially when I set my business up, I was thinking, well, yeah, that degree was really handy, wasn't it? But actually it has come in handy quite a lot, especially around branding and stuff. But I love to dance, so I like to go to like dance things, and just I think that's a really good way, like you're talking about exercise, I think it's a really good way to kind of express yourself and get rid of some stagnant energy. And writing, I really like to write as well. I don't paint much these days because I think I just can't associate with it, or I would love to do it, but it's quite a time consuming thing, which I don't have as much time to do now. But definitely it's something that you can always go back to. And I tend to go to the odd life drawing class as well. I actually really like life drawing. I don't think I'm that great at it, but
I wouldn't mind doing that again, because if that was something as part of my art course when I was like 18 that I think I enjoyed the most, was the life drawing side of it, because there was such an element of unpredictability that I loved. Like you didn't know what the lighting was going to be like, you didn't know what the subject was going to be like, the pose that you were going to get, the angle you're going to get, and even just exploring with medium like there, you could pick up charcoal, you could pick up pencil, whatever. There was something quite exciting about that. It is something that I do want to get back into. But you're right, writing is a really interesting one, because I think it's a hugely underrated form of expression and creatively for the average person. Everyone sort of seems to think it's this very unattainable thing. Everyone can write, right? Well, presumably, the majority of us can write far more than can feel confident picking up a paintbrush or something. And I feel like there's a missed opportunity for most to express themselves and refine that over time. And as a founder especially, it's a hugely beneficial skill, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I think the more you do it, even though maybe you might not believe that you're good at it, the more you do it, the more you let go of maybe those negative beliefs that says that you're not a good writer, and then you just get into it. So I think you know, the more we think about it, the harder it is. Whereas when we just let ourselves write, you know, even if no one ever reads it, it's just about, you know, that kind of form of self-expression. And I think writing and journaling is actually a really good way of getting to know yourself, like, you know, becoming more self-aware of like what your motivations are, you know, why you behave in certain ways. Like, actually, I'm doing this really cool thing at the moment, which is this book I'm reading called Change Your Mind by this guy called RJ Spinner, who's like an incredibly inspiring guy. Like, he had basically was sort of paralyzed from the neck down, and he completely healed himself with like this kind of thing that he created. But I'm reading this book, and there's a 14-day kind of journaling prompt. So you basically, everything you do, now it's quite time consuming, but everything you do, so as soon as you get out of bed in the mornings, you write. So say, for instance, like, maybe this isn't a great example, but you would write like, why do I drink coffee in the mornings? And then it's really interesting because your subconscious answers, and then you kind of continue to question yourself, and then you realize, God, why I drink coffee in the morning is not why I thought I drank coffee in the morning. And it just sort of really
you question your motivations,
clarifies your motivations, which we don't even really understand, because a lot of these things that we do are on automatic, that we've probably learned over decades. And you know, some of those things we probably don't even enjoy anymore, but we've just kind of got stuck in these sort of habitual patterns. So I think it's
why I drink coffee now.
It's really interesting, and you do it and you kind of do it with everything. So I've been finding it quite interesting.
I drink decaf as well. Why the fuck am I drinking decaf?
Yeah, well, you should try it and just see.
Maybe I should.
It's just probably a habit, but it's quite interesting in terms of like, especially with work, like, so, you know, why do I do certain things in a certain way? And it's just sort of like helping me to get clarity around different kind of things that I do, or that I have been doing probably unconsciously, that I can now transform because I realized the motivation behind why I was doing it.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I might have to try that, you know. That's a good food for thought. Yeah. And what you mentioned there about painting as well. So I don't remember if we talked about this before when we first spoke, but I do a bit of painting as well. I've just converted the outbuilding. I've been sort of documenting it on LinkedIn. I don't know if you've been seeing any of my posts about it, but me over the last sort of like 2 months at weekends trying to convert the outbuilding into my new office, because as you can see, I'm in my living room, which isn't ideal with all the comings and goings of people. So I've just converted that, and I've kept a little space on the side, which I'm planning on turning into like the art studio side. So it's going to be office and art studio, because I haven't done it for years, and I've literally got paintings. So let me show you one. Right, I've got two right next to my desk. They have been here for what, 7 years, something like that.
Reminding you to finish them.
Look, there's one. Still haven't finished it.
Oh wow!
Haven't finished it, and because I used to do a lot of stuff with comic book and superhero, science fiction stuff, and you know all that. But then also like just regular human portraits. There, look, see.
Oh wow!
Still haven't finished it. It's been like 7 yeers. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I've got a few paintings like that, canvases. I've actually hidden them now because I'm sick of looking at them.
I've got more. These are the only two that's. Well, the worst one is I've got a huge portrait I'm doing of my wife and I's wedding photo. So because I did those for a little bit of friends and family. I did a few wedding portraits, you know, like painted them huge. They gave me a photo and I painted them huge. So that's the main one, because I promised that I would have had that finished a long time ago. And we've now been married for like 5 years now. So yeah, I should probably get going on that one. I think that'll be the first one.
That'll be your first one to finish.
Yeah, I probably should. But a lot of it comes down just to not having the mental headspace for it, like you said, the time, and feeling like it's not priority when you've got business to run and so on. But also, for me personally, it's having the right physical space to do it.
Yeah, totally.
You know, I need to feel like I can just what's the word, like spread out, and just, be not have to worry about, I need to tidy this up later. And all this other, because if I do it on the living room table, it's like, okay, I have to set it all up and then I have to put it all away, and it doesn't feel like a creative space. It's too temporary,
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that I'd find is I get all my paints out and I'd get really into it, and then I'd have to tidy it all away, and then I just couldn't be asked to get it all back out again. So yeah, I totally understand. And I think as well, when you do sit down and do it, that creativity is such an amazing way to access a flow state. So once you get over your initial resistance and you put some tunes on and you get into it and you think, oh yeah, I actually remember how to do this and I'm enjoying it, you just don't really care about anything else than what you're doing, and that in itself, is such a freeing state.
Absolutely. But on the flip side, what I found is that there's two things. Like sometimes when I did have a setup for it previously, there'd be days where I'm like, I just want to go and do 10 minutes. And I'll just go and do 10 minutes on a little piece. I'm like, okay, and I'll come back to the rest tomorrow, whatever. Like just the ability to be able to do that. But then equally, sometimes sitting down and saying, I'm going to sit down and I've got 3 hours. I can sit down and do 3 hours. And I'll sit down and half an hour in, I'm like, I'm just not feeling it. And walk away. Now, both of those scenarios where you've got to set everything up and put everything away, not ideal. You can't do that. So to be able to just dip in and out of something too is kind of my thing. It's my vibe and the way I do things. And with certain things I'm a bit chaotic, with other things I'm very strict and organized, and that's one I prefer to have a bit more chaotic, but in an organized way which allows me to be chaotic. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, spontaneity, I think it's
right. That's the word I'm looking for.
We like to call it. Because if you get the creative urge, and I think that's the thing that we talked about, you can't be like, right now you need to be creative. You have to create that environment and that space that allows you to get those ideas and things and feel in a good place to be able to then execute on it.
Exactly. Yeah. Like going to the gym and stuff like that, it's the same sort of thing, isn't it? Yeah. Well, hopefully I'll get back into it and finish those bloody paintings. But so what kind of stuff do you do with so you mentioned you do sort of creative, well, actually, no, sorry, I'm jumping ahead a bit. So let's go back again then to a little bit to my original question, which is sort of about, you coming up through working with the NHS, so working with offenders, which by the way, must have been a very difficult job. Like, what were you doing exactly working with them? Were you working them with very much one-on-one? Was that solo? Were you part of a wider supportive team? Like what did that sort of look like?
So at first I ran a service which was an intensive 48-hour service. So what I would do is I would meet people when they got discharged at the gates, generally one-on-one, but I had a team of volunteers that I trained because we were working on basically all the London prisons. So there's quite a lot, actually there is quite a lot of London prisons. So we would go to meet them at the gates and we'd make sure that we had a lot of paperwork, because most people when they're discharged, they're homeless. So we'd need to take them straight to the homeless persons unit, but we'd have to have kind of like backup from the mental health inreach team in the prison if they'd been assessed, because a lot of times people would go in and be on the list to get assessed, but because the duration was short, they would kind of like fall through the gaps of services. So our role was to basically make sure that we had some contact with the inreach team. So if there was an assessment or a diagnosis, medication, that we could then go to the homeless persons unit and show that the person was sort of in an emergency need for accommodation, and then help them get housed. We'd set up the first meetings with the benefits and making sure that they had like the basic sort of foundational needs to survive first. And that the project started for 3 years and it was really successful and it got extended. But it was a shame in a lot of ways, and I used to find it quite frustrating, but because of our funding, it was really limited to 48 hours. So we'd be able to maybe, because there's not a lot you can do in 48 hours, to be honest with you. I mean, housing, maybe we'd get some temporary accommodation, but then they'd need to kind of produce more paperwork, and there'd be other stuff. So we tended,
you're kind of getting the ball rolling on a lot of things, I
yeah,
imagine, but you don't really know the outcome.
so we tend to kind of extend it for about 2 weeks so that we could sort of get them like into the right things that they needed, and then we'd kind of just sort of have to leave them, which was, you know, a bit of a shame really, because people need a lot more support than that.
Yeah.
And then after the 3 years, I then went into working with Barnet Haringey and Enfield Forensic, or North London Forensic Service, and that's when I kind of developed a service of supporting people when they got discharged from hospital. So doing a lot of assessments. So I do like an initial assessment with people and then sort of find out, you know, exactly what they wanted to do, but it was very much focused around employment, education and training. So during that time, I started to develop like an expert by experience role. So I trained up people who were kind of ready and wanted to do something like that, so that they could train. So we did a lot of stuff with the Royal College of Psychiatry, West London University. We sent people in to help train mental health nurses on like how people through like sort of person-centered approaches to support. And then when I went into work actually at Chase Hospital, I set up and developed a recovery college, which is basically looking, sort of moving away slightly from the medical model, where you have a psychologist and then you have a person who's experienced depression, and they sort of co-produce or co-create a course together, which people would come to, and they'd hear kind of, you know, the medical approach or psychology sort of recommendations for depression, you know, what it is, like the symptoms, you know, some ways that you can manage it. But then you'd also hear from somebody who had a lived experience of that. And it was really, really successful, but it was, you know, incredibly powerful because it gives people a lot more agency to, you know, manage their own condition, and shows them that, you know, there is life beyond the sort of situation and the circumstance that they find themselves in. And, you know, to be able to kind of upskill people with, you know, expert by experience was like hugely powerful, because people would get paid for doing this work, and, you know, it'd really give them sort of like we talked about again, sense of self-belief and confidence, and you know, the fact that all those years that they'd spent, you know, going through those challenges hadn't been in vain, because actually then they could now start to share their experiences and help others on their own recovery journeys. So that was hugely successful, and just, you know, really gave me a lot of knowledge and kind of wisdom in terms of, you know, what works, what doesn't work, and really how that approach is just much more powerful than someone being told, here's the medication, you know, this is what you should do. Because, you know, again, I know some medication is powerful and some people you do really need that, but I don't think it solves the problem, because I think that's half of the issue, is that we need practical tools and techniques, and, you know, understanding how our minds work and how we can, you know, support ourselves to enhance our well-being. And I think that's really kind of lacking, and this way kind of really helps that. And I sort of brought that into what I do at the Wellness Revolution as well, of like really kind of understanding like how to make it more accessible to people, and what people really kind of want to hear, and, you know, what they resonate with. Because if we don't resonate with something, we're not engaged with it, then we're not going to, you know, take it forward.
So so you say you've translated a lot, that wealth of experience, by the way, which is and presumably very difficult work. So more power to you, and thank you for doing it. But so you've taken that work and then you've translated it, like you said, into the wellness revolution. Well, sorry, what is it? Well-being.
The Wellness Revolution.
The Wellness Revolution. Sorry, well-being revolution. Wellness Revolution. So what does that look like practically speaking when you're working with? Do you go directly with the companies? Are you working directly with employees? Like what what does it look like as a whole? Like, paint a picture so we can understand.
Yeah, so I'll paint a picture. So first of all, it kind of really starts with consultancy.
Right.
So to find out kind of, what are the issues in the organization, what would the organization like to, give to their employees, like what are they looking to achieve in terms of well-being, what's already been in place, like how successful has that been, like where are the knowledge gaps. And then the thing that we really sort of pride ourselves on is that we create bespoke programs or services for that organization, because obviously not a one size fits all. Organizations are very different, cultures are very different, some places might be really good at this but not really good at that, and it's just sort of like looking at all the components. So first of all, well-being is multifaceted as well, particularly in the workplace, because it's not just our mental and physical health, it's the conditions of our work, it's leadership, it's play, like we talked about, creativity, communication, workload. There's so many different factors that influence an individual's well-being. So we really kind of take a look at that and start to sort of deconstruct it, and then create something that is going to support that organization to create those foundations sort of after we've gone. So different ways that we do that is between sort of helping them to create strategy, like well-being strategies, looking at leadership and areas where training is needed, or kind of a redesign of training, because leaders these days need many different skills than they used to. And leaders are kind of expected now to be well-being experts, counselors, this, that and the other, but they don't actually have had the training for that. And not everybody who goes into a leadership role is actually a people person. Normally people then sort of get promoted into leadership roles because they're actually good at their jobs, but it doesn't mean to say they're good with people. So it's really kind of looking at that as well, and sort of how to create more conscious leaders that are equipped to deal with the many different things that come up in organizations, and also to understand emotional intelligence in a way of like how much they influence the people that work underneath them. So if you're super stressed all the time, then chances are your team is going to be super stressed all the time, because emotions are contagious. Happiness is, you hear that saying, happiness is contagious. Well, it is, but negative emotions are contagious. So if you've got an issue with burnout and stress in your organization, that tends to kind of filter down to everybody. And so it's really about kind of becoming aware of like what those issues are, and then how you can be very intentional about how you design the employee experience and the culture around that, because essentially culture is just like us, like culture is the behaviors and the actions and the belief systems that you repeat over time. So if you've got a dysfunctional culture, which unless you're being intentional about it, you will have an element of a dysfunctional culture, because without that intentionality, it's difficult to craft it in the way that you would like it to be for the benefit of your employees and your business. So it's really about kind of showing people how that works. And we help design things like team rituals, which sort of really help people to cultivate cultures of well-being, and understanding all the layers that come with that, and that it's not just getting a mental health first aider in. Like, I really am not a fan of that approach at all, because
what is that approach?
So you might have heard of it, you might not. I mean, it's quite
I've not heard of it.
So mental health first aid is like a accredited 2-day course where you can go on, and your company will send somebody to be a mental health first aider, and so they would be a point of contact within the organization, that just a bit like a first aider but for a mental health first aider. But there's so many things that come with that. I mean, 2-day course, you can't really train somebody to support people with mental health. You can give them some basic information, but you can't really give them the full expertise of that. And also it's a lot of heavy lifting for that person. So if you've not got anything place. When I worked for the NHS, everybody had clinical supervision because you're working with a lot of stuff, and you also need to kind of process that. But what happens in organizations is they think, oh, this is accredited thing, we can sort of tick that box of mental health in our organization. But there's several reasons why it doesn't work, and there's a lot of evidence out there to show that it doesn't work. There have been a lot of studies. One is because there's a kind of like re-stigmatization, I think, that happens with the mental health first aider. There is still so much stigma around mental health in the workplace, in society, bigger in ourselves, that if we kind of see somebody labelled as a mental health first aider and we have a stigma, which most people do, we're not going to approach them because we're going to feel like, they're already, got their eye on us because they don't think we're okay, or, and it just sort of, I feel like it just sort of creates a more segregation around it. What we need to be doing is creating cultures where we are encouraging people to talk about how they feel, like daily check-ins, or especially if you're a remote team and things like that. So, but then also the person who's the mental health first aider, they're not getting support from the organization. So, I just don't think it's the solution at all. But I think the problem is, business are always looking for a quick fix, and they just think, oh yeah, we'll send. And I'm sure there are companies that are doing it really well and that they do have support for their mental health first aiders, and it does work in a sense, but it doesn't solve the cultural problems, and it doesn't solve those bigger issues around are our workloads too high, like are our managers toxic, is our culture toxic, why are people's mental health being affected by work, what's going on outside, how are people, what's going on in people's lives, do we actually really know our people? Not everybody wants to share everything that's going on in their life, but if you have a close culture, then really you should be thinking about getting to know people, like who they are as a whole, not just Dave in accounts, who he is in that role. So I think there's a lot that needs to be kind of unlearn around that, and not looking for quick fixes and ticking box exercises.
But that's quite common, isn't it? I mean, I wanted to ask you about this as well. Like, how is business? And what I mean by that question is, we all know that there's waves of what organizations consider to be important, right? It changes year on year, and consultancy is usually one of the main areas. Like, I know myself as an ex-consultant, I don't consider myself a consultant now, so I don't work in that capacity as much. It's more one-on-one, but I know myself firsthand that that's very much how it goes. That 1 year it's a very hot topic to get a diversity inclusion consultants in, for example, talk about that. Another it's wellness, another it's sales training, another it's management training, and it kind of goes up and down and depends on the issue at hand. Sustainability and being eco-friendly, and kind of, there's always these sort of waves that happen. So how are things right now in that sense? Which is why I'm asking, how is business? Is this still very much a topic that businesses are wanting to grapple with, and they still consider it to be important, or is it seen still to be a bit of a nice to have?
Yeah, I think it was, from my experience, I think it was more on the agenda last year,
right?
And I think this year,
fairly soon after COVID, you think?
Well, yeah, but I think this year as well, we've seen, the beginning of the year, January, there was a lot of layoffs in a lot of companies. Big companies like Google, they even got rid of their mental health and wellbeing director, I think. So,
wow.
There's been a lot of layoffs at the beginning of the year, which is still sort of impacting organizations. So they've had to shift budgets, and, lots of sort of changes have happened. It's still definitely, people are wanting to, and I think especially like what I'm seeing is more, especially around consultancy, how do we kind of deal with these issues that are going on in our culture and make, our employees happier, because obviously unhappy employees is, low productivity, it's absenteeism, it's, affects a lot of business objectives, KPIs and imperatives. So I think it is being seen as much more, not a nice to have, it's a very important thing. But, are people spending as much money as they did last year? I don't think so much. And I'm not just seeing that kind of in my business, but I see it in sort of other wellbeing businesses as well. I think there's sort of some shifts around what, like, we design offsites and deliver retreats, and I think that's becoming more of a focus point of, you know, understanding that, you know, maybe some of the well-being things that have been offered in the past, because of the nature of the organization workloads, you know, especially if you've had layoffs, then people are doing more work than they were before. So, you know, some of those things people aren't really getting time to access, or even if they do, it's, you know, they're so burnt out that, you know, it's just not really maybe a good spend because the cultural issues that are impacting that. But I think offsites and retreats are, especially for remote teams, you know, they're a really great way to bring teams together, to promote well-being, to promote team building, to actually, you know, be together without the stress of like the everyday monotony of work. And they actually are very, very impactful. So I think there's a real shift around organizations, you know, also wanting to be back in the office too, and wanting to do more kind of shared experiences together, and the impact that actually has on culture, on employee well-being, and on performance. So I think there's definitely a shift around that, and I'm sort of seeing more like inquiries for next year, and, you know, how people can sort of start building that into budgets now. You know, workshops and webinars will always be a thing, I think, especially when it's to do towards a certain kind of date coming up, like World Mental Health Day. Oh, you know, what should we do for this? Let's do this. So I think there is, and I think coaching is becoming much more kind of recognized as well, of a really important offering for, you know, employees to really kind of reach their potential.
Sorry, that was my dog. Every time I record, I don't know, can you hear him?
Yeah.
Yeah, every time. Yeah, no, that's, you just listed off quite a few different things there, you know, coaching, these sort of retreats and things like that. So out, you know, you presumably you just do more the consulting and the workshop side of things, is that right? Or do you also offer these other elements, like the sort of the coaching and the retreat side of things and so
yeah
forth?
So I'll just give you sort of a rundown of like what our services are. So in consultancy, that would be like strategies and then kind of looking at employee experience.
I'm going to bring up your website while you're explaining this, because I just realized I forgot to show it.
Yeah, our website needs updating a little bit actually, but we also create playbooks. So we do like leadership playbooks or culture playbooks. So we collect a lot of data and then we produce something that really sort of ties into the culture, especially around, you know, certain things, which they're really kind of nice, fun, effective ways of, you know, spreading a new message and sort of getting people on board with things. And then we do sort of collecting data. So we really do a lot of insight collection on, you know, what's going on in the organization around culture, well-being, performance, and how then we can kind of use that data to design something that works for the organization. We create well-being programs, so bespoke programs around, you know, delivering workshops, group coaching sessions, different ways to kind of support learning. And we also do the offsites and retreats. We design those, and yeah, that's kind of us. And obviously workshops and webinars are all part of kind of the offering. So it sort of really depends. So things like we do a really cool remote program, which is called Winning from Home, which is looking at kind of productivity, well-being, burnout, mindset, energy, different ways that like remote workers can kind of foster those things more in their daily life, and just sort of, you know, really educating people around different tools and techniques and concepts that can really kind of empower them and enhance their well-being, and also, you know, really kind of, you know, impact, and also doing those collectively. Obviously that's another way of team building. So our sessions are really interactive, and we, you know, sort of give learning, but then kind of get people to sort of try stuff out as well.
That's a lot that you cover. So I mean,
a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the show and only takes a couple of minutes. Thank you.
In the well, I mean, was it the case that you, before launching the business, sort of sat down and designed the majority of this, and you sort of built a framework around this, and then sort of went to businesses to offer it? Or is a lot of this kind of developed over time, and you sort of added a lot on a lot of these additional services or areas of focus, I guess you could say, as you went? Is that kind of more the organic route that you went?
Yeah, I mean, obviously in the beginning we did have like a structure of like what kind of things that we wanted to offer, and then
right.
I think over time it's just sort of grown as we've worked with more businesses. We've sort of seen different areas where we hadn't, you know, for instance, the playbooks was something that when we were working with client, we're like, oh, this would be really helpful, and actually it was really, really successful, and then sort of been something that's become one of our services.
Again.
Yeah. And the same with the offsites and retreats. We were kind of really noticing that it was quite difficult to kind of get, you know, really high engagement, even, you know, with the internal comms and stuff like that, particularly for organizations that were, you know, really kind of overworked and really busy. And actually the offsites and retreats really gave like a different way to get sort of more engagement, but also just allow that space for people to come to something and really, you know, absorb learning and different ideas and different ways of working, and create that together, you know, having that space to have conversations and take part in activities and start to think outside the box of what the daily kind of grind of work is, because not a lot of change happens when we're just sort of stuck in the sort of consistent cycle of, you know, fighting fires and being reactive to, you know, whatever's coming our way. And so it can be really hard to, even if you are, you know, offering a 1 hour wellbeing workshops that's really high quality, the chances are that people that aren't going to get engaged with it fully, especially if you're doing it online, because, you know, they might be doing other stuff in the background, they want to see it, but, you know, it's just, you know, if you don't create the space for people to be able to actually come and relax and enjoy something, then it's not going to be super beneficial. So it's really
environment matters hugely, doesn't it?
Hugely, yeah.
Because even in someone's office, like, they're probably going to be sat there, or some of them might be sat there thinking, I've got so much to do. You know, I've got so much to do. But actually having a day away or half a day away, it's like, okay, this is what we are here for.
Totally.
That's a huge impact.
Yeah.
So I mean, it sounds like an incredibly bespoke and very very detailed process. So during well, I wanted to ask your opinion on something. So do you find, what's your opinion on the idea that or where the line is with where there should be intervention in regards to mental health? So, you know, we know, like you've laid out there's a lot of different areas that affect someone's well-being in the workplace. There's a lot of factors happening at home, in personal relationships, and maybe family life, or, you know, financial situation. It could be lack of hobbies. It could be all sorts. And I've often had this debate with people where in this line of work, where it's difficult to know where the line is in terms of what is appropriate to start, you know, giving advice on, or where to start, you know, tinkering. Because at the end of the day, it's a workplace. People come there to work, earn money, and go home. So how much say should an employer really have, working with a third party like you, or even by themselves, or not say, but input should they really have in these areas, when ultimately these are people's personal lives? Should we be mixing them up? Would you have some, I'm assuming you must have some pretty strong opinions around that and how best to balance that?
Yeah, I mean, I do have some strong opinions on it, definitely, because I do think it is a workplace's responsibility to make sure, you know, that employees are happy in the workplace. So, you know, leaving maybe out stuff that's happening in personal life, if you've, you know, it is as much as it's your responsibility to create an environment, like through health and safety, that, you know, you've got good chairs, you've got, you know, fire exits, you've got all those things. You also need to be making sure that you are giving as much thought to the psychological safety within your organization, and, you know, what are your pathways for somebody who's in distress? What are your pathways to manage conflict resolution? What are your pathways to manage? You know, there's also something that's not really talked about very much. I see it a little bit more now, but there's a lot of bullying that goes on in workplaces.
Yeah,
you know, the impact that that has on somebody. And also, I just don't really think workplaces are very equipped to deal with it. You know, it gets stuck in HR. The person who's being bullied still has to, you know, be around the bully, or, you know, if it's on a bigger scale than that, you know.
yeah, because the worry is always just, are we going to get sued?
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty much the only worry.
HR is handling it from a sort of legal business perspective, but we also need to handle things from a human perspective. I understand that, but you know, so yes, you know, it actually is a really, really important factor as a business. You know, as much as you have to have insurance and things like that, you know, this is something super important. And there is an ISO, I can't remember the exact number of it, but there is one around psychological safety. I'll share the link so you can put it in when you load the, and so any business needs to be looking at the guidelines of that to kind of build the basis of what they need. So, you know, how are we supporting people? We shouldn't really be advising people either, unless we have someone specifically trained or we're working with an external organization. What employee benefits do we have? You know, every company now should have an EPA. You know, that should be a non-negotiable. So, you know, you should be kind of, you know, offering, we've got 6 free counselling sessions available to all of our employees. You don't have to contact HR. Here's the number. It's completely anonymous. And, you know, that should be something that every company is offering, you know, anyway. And just really thinking about, yes, obviously, if people are going through stuff in their personal life, and let's face it, you know, everyone is suffering with something. You know, some people are more conscious of it, some people are less conscious of it, but everybody is affected by something. It's all part of being human. You know, if we were all really positive, happy beings all the time, we'd be enlightened and we wouldn't be here. So,
for sure.
You know, and then you put a load of unhealed people all in the same environment together. You know, you're going to have tension. There's going to be conflicts. There's going to be, you know, people who are struggling. There's going to be a lot of people who can't talk about, you know, the fact that they're struggling. As we talked about, you know, stigma is a real thing. It exists. The worst kind of stigma is the internal stigma that stops people getting support and help because they're worried about what other people are going to think of them, or they're worried that if they say it out loud, it means they can't cope. You know, I think there's, especially within our culture, there's this very sort of like stiff upper lip type of approach to things like that. You know, we don't ask for support, like, you know, and that I feel that is the workplace or organization's kind of responsibility to create cultures that dissolve those ways of being, because the more, you know, think of how many men are dying from suicide every year. That is so unnecessary, you know. But people, especially men, find it really hard to reach out for support. So, you know, we really need to look at culturally, you know, and it's not just about the workplace, it's about how do we start to have more open conversations, how do we acknowledge that actually, yes, it is our responsibility. You know, we want our employees to be, you know, working to their full potential. Then we also need to know that they're not just a robot, that they have emotions, that they have feelings, that they might have a bereavement, that they might lose a relationship, that, you know, and all these factors impact all of us all the time. So it's really, you can't separate the two. You can't separate human beings from work. You know, it has to be, and that's where I feel that we need a revolution in the workplace in terms of like really humanizing it and understanding that actually, and if you look at all the top performing organizations out there, the reason why they are like that is because they are human workplaces that look after their people, that actually give a shit about their people, and they want their people, you know, to feel good, to, you know, have better relationships with their money, to have, you know, better relationships with their colleagues, and they invest in creating, you know, learning opportunities, growth opportunities, you know, delivering EPA, you know, whatever it is, they look at the environment they want to create. And, you know, there's so much data out there too, you know, there's no excuse for you not to kind of understand. And I think that's the big thing as well, which organizations really need to kind of get more conscious around is that well-being and performance are intrinsically linked. You can't have one without the other.
Yep.
So we really, in order to kind of push the needle forward and really sort of change the state of affairs, we really need to acknowledge like how those two are related. And
physical and mental health play a huge part, don't they?
Yeah, and not just physical, mental health. I think we're also looking at emotional health, because I think for me,
right,
mental well-being and emotional well-being are almost kind of two separate things. So for me, mental well-being is more like cognition and how you're performing, your productivity, your ability to manage time and like problem solve and make decisions. And then your emotional well-being is obviously very much tied into your emotions, like regulating how you regulate your emotions, like how self-aware you are, like emotional intelligence, and kind of understanding that all of these things are multifaceted and how they all kind of link into each other. And there is, I think we do have, like, everybody has a responsibility to make sure that everybody's okay, and we can't turn a blind eye to someone suffering just because it's uncomfortable for us, or it's something that we don't really know how to deal with. And I think that's half the problem. Most people are very kind-hearted, but they just don't really know the right thing to say. And so then what happens in our culture is we just avoid it, because we just think, oh shit, I don't want to say the wrong thing. It's like anything, like pronouns, like anything around D&I. It's not that we aren't, not that we don't want to see a change, or the whole doesn't want to see a change. I think there's just still this sort of like really weird sort of uncomfortable awkwardness of not wanting to say the wrong thing. So rather than say the wrong thing, I won't say anything, which is actually in a lot of ways worse.
But in some ways, I think there's a slight difference as well, in that part of the reason why people don't often want to talk about the way they feel is because of they'll change the way that they're viewed, right? So not just to say the wrong thing, I mean, to some degree of what you're saying, to be seen as a bigot or whatever, but more to, like, by their employers be seen as different than the way they're previously perceived, and maybe potentially lose out on certain opportunities as a result. And that's a very real thing.
Yeah.
And like, I think to understand that, what we need to do first of all is acknowledge that isn't always out of a place of prejudice necessarily, like or what's the word I'm looking for? It's not vindictive, right? It's not inherently an evil or bad thing to do. It's quite often just down to simple business. That if, let's say, for example, you've got a certain amount of employees in a team, and there's a promotion coming up, and out of the two people that you've got on the cards to potentially take this huge promotion with a lot of additional responsibilities, maybe a huge amount of new business potentially sitting on the line, and one of them goes through a bereavement, that means that they are in an emotionally fragile place. Well, the employer is going to choose the other. And that's just the reality of the situation. They need someone stable. They need someone to get the job done. So you can understand why people don't want to communicate their feelings. And you mentioned the male suicide rate. I mean, as a man, we know this all too well, that and for not to generalize, but it is a fairly known fact that men tend to be a little bit more harshly judged on expressing their feelings than women. Again, being general. It's not really surprising, because you do get judged by that, and you can miss out on potential opportunities for raising that. So I can't quite see how we can solve that, because that's inherent,
Well, it is, but it's not, because, and this is kind of what we're talking about, is like, in order for any of this to change, everybody has to play a part in it. So we need to shift and the reason why we all think like that is because there's three layers to stigma. So there's institutional stigma, there's social stigma, and then there's self-stigma. And so institutional stigma is at the top. So the reason why, and if you think about it like this, let's have a bit of a history lesson right now. So I think in 1983, the last asylum closed. So that's not even quite 40 years, or maybe it is slightly, 2023, that's 40 years. So if you think of like how much in society in the 80s mental health was stigmatized. So we used to send people to asylums. That's how much we stigmatized it as a society and as a culture. And we only closed those down 40 years ago. So we're not going to unravel all of that stigmatization within a 40-year period.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, we've definitely done, you know, we've definitely made some good headway.
Come a long way. Yeah,
we've come a long way, but in order to kind of accelerate that and really shift it, we need to change those, you know, first of all, government needs to invest more money into, you know, you look at, well, when I worked for the NHS, it's quite a long time ago, but I know, for instance, now that it's really, there's a huge waiting list to get, you know, access to therapy. There's, you know, many people in this country, God knows how many, but are being prescribed medication. You know, there is, you know, mental health is a crisis. Like, it's getting worse. It's not getting any better. So we need to start to invest as a, you know, governments and, you know, institutions investing more in actually how we support to change this. Whereas 40 years ago, no money was being invested in mental health, or very little. And when I used to train, in 40 years, you look at how many advances in pharmaceutical treatments for cancer, for you know, degenerative diseases, and how many different kind of new ways of managing and treating those conditions are. In terms of mental health, like within 20 years, there was only one new different type of medication created. So it's like, you know, if those systems, and it's not just about investment, it's also about policy. So if the institutions still have a lot of stigma around mental health, because they do, then we're not changing policies properly. We're not really, we're maybe looking at it from a surface level because it's like, oh shit, we need to do that. But we're not actually really looking at the core of why these things are happening, and how we can actually, as a society or as institutions that control society, are changing them. So
it's treating the symptoms rather than the disease, right?
Yeah, totally. And so then obviously social stigma is then impact. So then what filters down from the institutions goes into the media. So then, you know, we pick up a paper, oh man with schizophrenia has gone out and stabbed somebody, and it creates all this fear. And so, you know, there's still, even, you know, the press nowadays is getting better. But I want to use a little example, actually. Maybe I might get, I won't say the organization, but I recently did a podcast for a very big broadcasting organization, and it was talking about my personal story and my own mental health challenges. And at the end of the interview, they have like a clip which says, if you've been affected by blah blah blah. It did not mention mental health at one point at all. And so I raised it and said, you know, I think it's really like bad practice that you're not signposting people, because if somebody listens to that, and, you know, my whole interview was talking about suicide, mental health issues, you know, the effects of these. And so if, you know, a big broadcaster like that isn't taking that responsibility to signpost people, you know, it's a duty of care, isn't it? If you're going to put something out there that could potentially upset somebody, you know. And so it really showed me like how prevalent it still is. And you know, it's also our kind of responsibility when we see it, just like when we see racism, just like when we see homophobia, we have to call it out. So, you know, and within organizations, we have to create those cultures where it's okay to talk about stuff. You know, everybody is affected by mental health. It's not just, you know, one person's affected by it and not the other. Yes, more kind of severe diagnoses affect less people, but actually, you know, if somebody's unwell and it keeps building over and over and over, then they're going to end up with a diagnosis. You know, that's how, you know, progressively we get more ill, and especially if we don't talk about it. So it's really about, you know, addressing these bigger issues of like understanding how much stigma is prevalent in society, how much we can then, you know, what is our responsibility as an organization, and how can we really look at how stigma is impacting our people from speaking up. And you know, if we've got leaders role modeling that they're talking about their well-being, and they're talking about stress, and they're talking about bereavement and things that are affecting them, and how they've dealt with anxiety and stress and, you know, addiction, whatever it is, then, you know, it's creating a safety, like that psychological safety, to show that, you know, it's not just employees that are affected by mental health, everybody is affected by it. And then the worst kind of stigma, as I say, is that the internal stigma. So you just talked, you know, you just, the point you raised then just, you know, really highlighted a lot of those things of, you know, I can't say that I'm suffering, or I can't say that I'm in need because I'm going to be looked at differently. Well, why am I going to be looked at differently? Because society stigmatizes and has basically influenced us all to believe that if there's something, you know, if we're struggling emotionally, then we must not be good enough, then we must not be able to deliver our work, then we're not capable. And actually none of that's true.
While it might not be true, it is true though that you're looked at differently. So understanding that, because I agree with you, like, on everything you just said, but to play devil's advocate, which isn't always popular, but I'll do it anyway because that's kind of the point of this show. While all that may be true, it is also true that you will be perceived differently more often than not. And understanding why that is the case doesn't prevent that from happening. So, you know, just me, and let's say, you know, me understanding why my boss might pass me over for the promotion if I'm more open about my mental health issues, let's say, or the struggles I'm going through and things like that. Him passing me over for that promotion isn't going to prevent that from happening. It's still going to happen. So you know, what can individuals do you think to sort of have their cake and eat it a little bit in that situation? Because that's the bit that I struggle with. And the reason why I'm laboring this example as well, by the way, just to give it a bit of context, is because I work and have worked predominantly with a lot of sales professionals, and in sales especially. Well, it's the world I know the most, right? So I'm going to use that as the example. But from my understanding, it is definitely the place where you see a lot of mental health issues, an enormous amount of alcohol and drug abuse, you know, working far too much for quite often very little reward, but people chasing those big paydays, chasing the promotion. It's very competitive, you know, very cutthroat. And that's where you see that a lot. Those that expose any amount of their neck, there's someone that will step over them to get that role. And that's what it is. And I agree, there's a lot of inherently wrong with the structure there. But if we're talking to those individuals, how can you have a better sort of balance? How can you, what advice can we give them to navigate that in a better way, to kind of have their cake and eat a little bit there? Or can we not? Is the advice there, go to a better company?
No, we can totally do that, I think. And it needs to be a two-pronged approach.
Get out of sales. That's the
well, it needs to be a two-pronged approach, I think. First of all, you would need to, you know, address the leadership of like what's going on, because I know those environments from, you know, when I was like at uni and stuff, you know, sales things, and also let's just flip it, happy salespeople make 37%, close 37% more deals. So you need to, I think it's about, you know, addressing leadership and first of all, you know, just giving them some basic, like, you know, fundamentals about mental health, and, you know, where it's, you know, because also I think it's like when you put the stigmatization in front of people and you say, this is the reality. So, and you give them an example about that, and you say, if somebody came to you with this, how would you treat the situation? And normally they'd given a response like, you know, something that you've just mentioned, and then you'd sort of say to them, well, actually that isn't the right way to deal with it, and can you see where your own stigma, or you're being influenced by, you know, that conditioning? So it's really kind of getting them
but could it not also just be a sensible business decision in some cases, not to burden someone more with responsibility and additional work and responsibility that might be associated with a promotion at a time where maybe they're quite vulnerable and they think that they want it and that they could do it, but actually making a decision to give it to someone who's at a better place in their life, you know what I mean? Like, so there's, but it kind of works both ways, right?
Well, yeah, but it's about the support. I think, you know, if somebody came to you who was super struggling, but also just because you have a condition doesn't mean to say that you're struggling. You can manage, you know, I might have depression, but I can manage it myself. Doesn't mean to say that I can't handle the pressures of another job. But if my manager's aware of it, and I can have reasonable adjustments, or maybe someone can support me. So it's not about just saying, oh, well, that person's this, then, you know, they can't possibly manage that, because also, you know, that's us making a call on whether someone can manage something, and that's not
so
really
then everyone's making assumptions at that point.
Yeah.
And nothing,
and that's about the assumptions. So I think it's about, you know, like really unlearning a lot of that. Oh, well, if someone's got this, or they're struggling, it means they can't do this. It's about actually, how can we help this person to reach their potential? You know, what can we put in place to support them? So, you know, they've just gone through a bereavement. I still really want them to get this promotion, but I'm going to give them a couple of extra people to handle this, you know, project for the first few months, and then we'll reassess and you know, keep checking in with that person. You know, don't just not give someone something because some, you know, awfuls happen like that. You know, yes, if they need to take a big amount of time off and it's really affected them so they can't work, that's a completely different story. But I think what we need to be aware of is that those decisions and those assumptions that we're making can actually make somebody even more unwell, because we're taking away their agency and, you know, their ability to make choices. And it really, you know, it wears down at somebody's self-belief. And then I think for the actual salespeople, you know, if you're in that environment, first of all, if that culture's toxic, then you need to get out, because it's never going to change, and it's actually just going to make you more unwell. But if it's not necessarily the culture, and it's just maybe some patterns that you've learned that you think you need to kind of continue with the pace of, it would be really about I would suggest initially of like getting somebody to really like give themselves a bit of an energy audit, or like a happiness audit, like where, you know, how do I feel on these 10 things? Like, what's my sleep? How much sleep am I getting a week? Like, how many hours am I working a week? You know, how do I actually feel? Like, what is going on with me? And then once you become aware that you're not happy, because the other sad thing is that when we're not really that happy, we get used to feeling like that. It's called, you know, learned helplessness. So we just sort of get used to feeling that this is the same thing that's going to keep happening to me. And then it sort of is a perpetual cycle that just sort of continues.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways, right?
Self-fulfilling prophecy. So in order to be able to change, or to notice that our well-being is low, and that doesn't mean, you know, we're not going out to exercise, you know, holistically, our mental health, so our emotional, you know, we're not really interacting with people, we're drinking too much, we're smoking too much, whatever those things are for you personally, the first step is becoming aware of, firstly, I don't feel great. And where is my energy going? Like, you know, really reflecting on kind of, you know, the sort of foundational things that make us feel good. Where am I on that scale? And if, you know, I am super stressed, if I'm really not good, you know, how can I start to make some incremental slight changes in my behaviors and my habits and my mindset to really shift that? And, you know, start to because we always, that's another thing that I think is really important to mention, is that everybody always has a choice in how they choose to show up for themselves, and how they choose to, you know, handle good situations, bad situations, you know, how they choose to care for themselves, to support themselves. A lot of the reasons that people's well-being becomes really affected is through lack of boundaries, especially at work. So, you know, is really like doing an assessment around, where's my energy going, where's my time going, am I giving more than I'm, you know, if I'm not filling my own cup, then, you know, I'm not really going to be any use to anybody. But also, you know, I'm really like doing myself a disservice here, and the only way that I'm going to be able to recharge my energy is if I start kind of like pulling a bit of it back, and you know, really kind of looking like, if I want to have a different experience, you know, I can't keep repeating the same pattern and expecting a different result. I think Einstein coined that. It's madness, you know. So it's really about you know, just because I think the biggest thing in well-being is just becoming more as self-aware as you possibly can, and really kind of looking at, you know, your thoughts. Like, our thoughts influence so much. If we're having negative thoughts all day, we're not going to be having a great experience of life. If we're you know, not looking after our bodies, if we're not sleeping, if we're eating badly, if we're, you know, drinking loads, or like whatever it is, you know, we all know the things that we all do that aren't good for us, and we all know the things that we do that are good for us. So it's really about, you know, just checking in with yourself and just thinking, gosh, especially like let's for instance talk about those sales people in that toxic environment that are living that life experience. Do you still want to be living this in a year's time? And if you don't, then how can you start to make changes in your life that are going to, you know, either keep you in that environment but you are able to keep balanced and feel good, or, you know, is it time to get out of it?
Yeah, and that's what I did. I got out. It wasn't good for me, so I got out. Yeah, I mean, I'm of the opinion, and look, this is just going to be me like saying it in a really dumb way, because you clearly know this sort of stuff way more than I do, but this is like my dumb brain sort of translating it and, you know, kind of saying my thoughts about it. But like, I'm of the opinion that there's like a certain amount of shit that we can take, like an acceptable level of shit we can take, and then an unacceptable level of shit we can take, right, before it crushes us. And like, I think there's, you know, there is a certain amount of shit we can take, though, importantly, and still function and be pretty happy actually in our lives. And I think that's another important thing to sort of bear in mind too, that you're not going to eradicate the amount of shit you get, because you're always going to get shit. But if you have your shit in order, I'm saying the word shit a lot, it's a good thing we can swear on this. If you have your shit in order, then you can take a surprisingly large amount of it, right? Because I'm distinctly aware of the fact as well that there are a lot of people that have not as much choice as maybe you or I have in terms of who their employee is, right? They don't have as many choices there. For whatever reason. And, you know, you work with ex-offenders as an example. There's a lot of people out there who have to take it when it comes, and, you know, don't have as much choice to say, like with the example of some of the salespeople, you know, just go, right, screw this, I'll go and work somewhere else. And even then, you know, now it's more and more competitive environment everywhere. So actually making that decision can be quite hard. So if you have your own life in order to a point where, you know, you can come into a shit job and still smile and walk out with a smile on your face and go, it doesn't matter, I'm leaving it there. You know, I think that's quite a big win in the grand scheme of things. If you're unable to make that a change, at least right now, it might be a good temporary solution.
Yeah, well, what you're talking about there is resilience, which, you know, if we can all build and foster resilience in ourselves, then yeah, we can bounce back from adversity, and we can be, you know, maybe in places that maybe aren't that beneficial for us, and be detached. But actually that's a process too, and that's a way of changing your mindset, of being able to reframe things in terms of, you know, not looking at the negative. Because also the only other thing as well that happens with that is that we sort of get to a sort of tolerance point where, you know, if we're constantly being attacked with negativity, then eventually, even if we are quite positive, that's going to affect us. So resilience is sort of, you know, really building that kind of muscle within you that allows you to be able to, because it's all about how we perceive things as well, you know. So really kind of being able to reframe, you know, when something maybe that happens that is a challenge, we look at it and say, well, what did I learn from that? And like, how did I grow from that experience, rather than being like, oh my God, why does everything always happen to me? And, you know, like looking at it from a sort of victim mentality. We look at it from a growth mentality of like, you know, what did we learn? Like, how can I go forward and not repeat this experience again? Like, what, you know, how did I contribute? Or did I contribute to what happened?
You know what's really interesting about you saying that is that what I've noticed is, and you can maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, if I've got the wrong perception, but in speaking to some of the corporations that I've worked with, clients, founders, and so on, who've spoken to other wellness coaches, consultancies out there, mostly in the States, there seems to be a focus for encouraging people to become aware of their victim state, that seems to be the way that they're approaching a lot of this, is encouraging people to, so say for example, you do come across quite a resilient individual who does look at things through that prism that you've just mentioned there, of looking at everything as a learning opportunity. Okay, how could I improve, and so on. That their approach seems to be, no, you shouldn't have had to have gone through that, and actually changing their mindset from that to the victim mentality, and saying that is actually more important. And I'm noticing, yeah, that's just the trend that I've noticed with some mostly larger firms out there, that and it seems to be I believe a slightly worrying trend. And one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to you is because when we first spoke, I recognized that wasn't at all your approach, which is very refreshing, because I was getting a bit concerned with that being a trend. Have you noticed maybe some competitors or some talk around that in your industry? And if so, like, where do you think that's coming from?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't noticed it so much, actually. I mean, I do think it's something that we all need to be aware of, if I'm really honest, because I do think that we all have the ability to feel victimized.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes, yes, it's worthy of feeling that, but also if we have a belief that bad things are going to happen to us, and that, you know, everything's against us, then it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy as well.
Yeah, it's inevitable at that point, isn't it?
Yeah, it's inevitable. Yeah. So I think, you know,
but it feels like it's the philosophy that underpins what you do in some ways, actually, what you just said there. Like, it really resonates, because it is like two opposing philosophies. It's almost like, you know, communism versus democracy. It's like, you know, it's like, you know, one is all about me and one is all about everyone else. You know, what one is what can everyone do for me, and the other is what can I do for everyone else. And it's kind of like, you know, it's very interesting, because it feels like a lot of organizations similar to yours operate on this very different philosophy. And I think inevitably that while it seems quite insignificant, it can yield far more different results, societally, let alone in an organization.
Yeah, and I think it is about looking at the we. You know, it's, you know, we're all part of something that comes together. You know, we, especially in an organization, we're all sums parts of the whole, aren't we? And we have personal responsibility, of course. Like, everybody has responsibility for their own self and for their own behaviors, and, you know, for their own actions. But we also have to understand, like, how we influence that as an organization, and actually, you know, how do we create the foundations for people to flourish? Like, you know, a lot of those old ways of working, because also, you know, work hasn't really evolved much in the last 100 years.
Yeah,
you know, it's starting to evolve now. But even, I mean, it's quite interesting even watching this sort of like debacle about kind of, you know, organizations wanting people to come back into the office full time. You know, that I'm hearing that a lot. Like, big organizations that I work with, they're like, oh yeah, we're telling everybody they need to come back in the office all the time. And it's like, well, why? You know, where's that flexibility of, yes, maybe we need to be in the office certain days together as a team, but actually, if my people are going to be more productive and their well-being is going to be better because they haven't got to commute for 2 hours a day, then, you know, why are we being inflexible about that? And so I think there's so much kind of like just unlearning and redesigning things that we just need to do as a society, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And I do think resilience is one of those skills that, you know, we can learn. It's something that we can actually really learn. So I'll give
can it be learned though, or does it through being taught, or can it only be learned through experience? Because I personally believe it can only be learned through experience.
No, see, well, there's a difference there, and that's based on positive psychology, or the science of positive psychology. So if you think, I'll give you an example of an optimist, right? So you think that or we've traditionally been taught that you're either pessimistic or optimistic, right? And if you're optimistic, it's like, oh, you're born with it. And
nothing's that black and white.
Nothing's that black and white. And actually, optimistic people are more resilient, because they don't look at, you know, they look at the glass half full, as opposed to the pessimist who looks at the glass half empty. But what you have in a workplace is you probably have a 50-50 split down the middle of pessimistic people and optimistic people, and it's no fault of their own, you know, either way. It's just kind of, you know, if we also think about our brains having a negativity bias, I think it's like 70% we have a negativity bias or something. That might not be
Well, I think it's just human beings as a whole, from my understanding.
Well, that's what I mean. No, what I was talking about, the brain has a 70% more chance of thinking to the negative. So all human beings have a negativity bias. Now, that's because our kind of programming system hasn't really upgraded in the last, since we've been on the planet. So our limbic system, which is what activates your flight and flight response, is looking for threats all the time. So of course you're going to be looking like you're prone to the negativity bias, because you're always going to be looking at, survival, safety, running away from a dinosaur if you were alive back then, or whatever it was that were the threats. But to modern society, our brains haven't evolved to distinguish running out of coffee and being chased by a shark. Like, it's the same thing. So
maybe two extreme examples.
What I'm trying to say is the brain has the same response,
right
in terms of like,
and that's where anxiety and depression are such issues with modern society, is because of a lot of flight and fight responses are being triggered with very mundane things, and that's causing a huge amount of chemical imbalance.
Totally. And the workplace is obviously a playground for that.
Hugely. Hugely.
So what were we talking about? Back to the optimist. So you can change the way you think to become more optimistic. So there's a way to do that around reframing situations. So when we were talking about kind of resilience, so when you look at a perceived negative experience, you reframe it and you say, well, what could I learn? There's many different techniques that you can use. But
if you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please like and subscribe with notifications turned on.
A gratitude practice is also one of those. Now, people think, gratitude practice is really fluffy, like whatever. It's actually
but it's about rewiring, isn't it?
It's scientifically proven to rewire your neural pathways. So if you're somebody who does tend to, notice the negative, and also is because they're noticing the negative, or having a more negative experience of life, or they don't feel as happy, they feel like life's a struggle, things are really tough, I'm not happy, why don't things work out for me? Like all those kind of belief systems that operate from somebody who is kind of having that experience. Whereas you have the optimist who will have challenges, because optimism isn't about toxic positivity either. It's about, being able to ride the highs and lows of life. Being human's messy, like it is ups and downs. Like sometimes you'll be, driving down a nice country road, sun's out, it's all lovely, and then in a split second you can be in a horrific thunderstorm. It just, that's what life is. So an optimist will approach life in a different way of even those times being able to come. It's like, well, there's three kind of things you can do. It's like, well, what can I accept in this moment? Like, what can't I do anything about? Like, what can I accept? What can I control in this moment? Like, where's my agency of being able to do something? And then the third one, which is the really important one, is like, what can I let go of? Because ultimately, we're not going to be able to solve all problems. We can't rewind something and do it again differently. If it, maybe we can for some things, but most things we can't. So if you can kind of look at every life circumstance, especially challenging ones, in those ways, what can I let go of is the biggest one. What do I need to accept in this situation? So say, for instance, you're losing your job. Well, if you resist that and you just constantly keep worrying about it and think, well, is there a way I can change that? Or, you're consumed by thoughts of that, it's not helping you. You're going more sort of down into the rumination and the stress and the anxiety and the depression. But if you're able to kind of say, well, I have to accept that's just happened, I can't do anything about it, what can I control? How can I get a new job? What do I need to do? Like, what are the actions I can take? Can I work? Is there someone I know who can give me a job? Like, whatever that is. I'm just using that as an example.
That's a great example, though, because I know people who've, obviously loads of people have been in those situations. So it's a really relatable one. I've been in that situation before. And there is definitely a huge difference I've noticed in the sort of those that take the optimistic approach compared to the pessimistic approach when it comes to the correlation between that and those that are more likely to find the next job. And not only is it, maybe there's some relation there between sort of hireability, in the optimists are probably conduct interviews probably perform better in interviews and so on, and maybe they come across as more likable, whatever. But ignoring that, I think the correlation actually just comes down to how they deal with it. Because even in very, very simple terms, if someone's going to throw a hissy fit when they lose their job, and they're going to make things difficult for their employer, to get them out the door, and not return property, or not do the exit interview, and just generally be a nuisance, well, the employer's not going to help them with anything else. But actually, 9 times out of 10, the more positive and optimistic individuals, myself included, by the way, I put myself into that camp. We're just like, okay, it is what it is. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I don't have to. I respect your decision. Leave amicably. Leave with your head held high. Every single time, almost every single time, the ex-employers will help make some connections, and do you know what I mean? It's like, it goes a long way. Because like you said, positivity breeds positivity. And so actually you're giving yourself more opportunities for success if you just, accept things and move on and try and make the best out of them.
Yeah, totally.
So that's a great example, I think, because
good.
There's so many things in there that I just suddenly thought of several people that are just like, you idiot. When I've seen people do it where they're just like making things more difficult for themselves and everyone else in that situation, it's like, you're an idiot. What are you doing? Like, what point are you trying to make? Just accept it, and leave on a positive note, because you're burning bridges. You just never know what you're missing out on by squandering the opportunities just for a small amount of satisfaction for being negative. For what?
Exactly. But then, some people, where they're used to being so negative, it's like they're almost addicted to the cortisol, and that's something as well is to look at and address. And thank God, if you kind of track your life experience in the last 3 months, and you kind of look at what's been happening in my life, and oh gosh, lots of drama, lots of whatever. Why is that happening? And why am I being attracted to those situations? And then then start to kind of look at that frame around, what can I let go of? Like, what can I control? What do I need to accept? And how can I, be more intentional about my thoughts? Like, I remember when many years ago, so about 13 years ago, when I was having really, really difficult issues with my mental health, and I was, trying everything, and I just realized like how my thought patterns had become very, very negative. Like, not just my thought patterns, but like my beliefs about myself. And I just sort of started to think, well, if I don't change this, and if I don't start to kind of, and I never was like that before, it was because, a circumstance, and then, mental health illness, and then the kind of reverberations of that, but then you start to learn these patterns, and they become you become very used to them. So I started to, and it was when I sort of started to meditate, actually, that I was able to draw awareness, because my brain, like most people's, was just completely on autopilot. I think the average person, there's lots of different things if you look on the internet, because you know what the internet's like, but I think they say between 60,000 to 10,000. I think it's more probably like 10,000 thoughts a day. So if you think you have 10,000 thoughts a day, it's 70% of those thoughts are negative. So they might not be downright, glaringly, obviously negative, but even just sort of, self-talk to yourself, like, oh, why haven't you done that? Or, oh gosh, you should have done this, or you're always late, or whatever it is that how you talk to yourself. Those things make a real impact.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I only have about 50 thoughts a day, so ignorance is bliss. I'm okay.
Yeah. Well, there's always that to do, isn't there? And I started to kind of realize through meditation, I started to become a bit more aware of my own thought patterns, and I started to see, gosh, like that's another negative thought, that's another negative thought, and I just started to see them. And I actually used to play this game with myself in the beginning, where I used to have like this electric fence around my brain, and every time I had a negative thought, I'd just like fry it on the fence, and then it sort of became like funny, and just I kind of got out of the habit of beating myself up about having negative thoughts, and just was like, you know, I'm not attaching to the fact that I'm having a negative thought. I'm observing it and I'm choosing to let it go, rather before I was like holding on to it, you know, and or it would just become habitual for me to think negatively. So once I sort of started to do that, then, you know, things started, within a couple of weeks, things started to really shift in like my mind, because I was like more in control of like what I'm actually thinking. And I want to go even a little bit deeper here now as well and talk about this Japanese scientist, which I can't remember the name of now, but again, I'll send it to you so you can put it in the chat. Now, he did these fascinating experiments with water. So if you think a human being is made up of 70% water, so he did these fascinating experiments where he got a glass of water and you put love, like the name of some emotions, on the water, and you got some school children to all think thoughts of love and direct it at this water, and then he froze the water and was able to get the structure, and it was like a beautiful snowflake, like all symmetrical, like really beautiful. And then he sort of went a bit of a step further, and he did different emotions. So I think it was like love, gratitude, compassion, and they're all different shapes, which is just absolutely fascinating.
I vaguely remember, did you mention this to me before when we first spoke?
I do talk about this.
Yeah, I vaguely remember you mentioning this before, and I think I even went to look it up, and I honestly can't remember if I've ended up finding it. Please do send it over. Yeah,
the name escapes me right now, but and then he did the experiments with hate and playing like death metal, and like what happened to the water, and the structures were all like deformed, and like they just had a really weird like energy about them.
So death metal can be quite relaxing sometimes.
So if you think you're made up of 70% water, and that experiment proves that, you know, thoughts affect matter. So if you're 70% water and you think negative thoughts, or you just even perceive yourself negatively, what's that doing to the structures in your body? So, you know, there's so many more layers.
But to your point, even disregarding that piece on its own, it's enough just to understand that, you know, neural pathways get you know, built, and your brain starts getting used to certain states, right? Like you mentioned about your experience, like, you know, 13, 14 odd years ago, you mentioned earlier, you know, I was in a similar position not that long ago as well, about 8 or 9 years ago, in a very abusive relationship at the time. And, you know, during that point, you know, you sort of slip into it very gradually, and you just don't realize you're there. And again, as an optimistic person, even people saying you don't seem yourself, you seem a lot more negative than you used to be, you're just like, no, I'm still me. And you're completely oblivious to it, because your brain has very slowly started to take on board, and you start believing the things that you're being told, and you start convincing yourself of those things you're told. So even without that other element, which, you know, some people, you know, may or may not buy into, but regardless of that, you don't even need that to back up your point. It's the science is already well proven there that totally. you can very easily slip into, like you said, being addicted to some ways of these chemicals, but also just not having that ability to step outside yourself and have a critical look.
And I think that's why self-awareness is so crucial, because without self-awareness, you know, you're just functioning on autopilot, and you're not even, you know, not even realizing that probably life is a bit mediocre, and that you're not actually that happy, but you're just so used to it that you don't know anything different. And
I think people conflate I was just saying, I think people conflate self-awareness as well with what other people think about them.
No,
people conflate those things together, and it's like, no. Self-awareness doesn't mean think about how you're being perceived. Self-awareness is just about, you know, what do you believe of your own perception. You know, it's very different, and I don't think a lot of people misunderstand that when you're saying, you know, you don't seem self-aware. It's like, oh well, I don't care what other people think about me. It's like, no, that's not what we're saying. Like, you know, it's a bit more than that.
Yeah, and I think obviously other people can be mirrors, like, you know, people can maybe reflect things to you that maybe you are not aware of about yourself as well. So I think, you know, self-awareness is about going within too, but we can be assisted in that process of becoming more self-aware by the way that other people interact with us too. So I think that is something to be sort of cognizant of and kind of understanding. You know, if people keep walking all over you, then you need to have a like reflection on, you know, why that is, like, you know.
Well, it's like we were saying, is the difference between that underlying philosophy of you know, are you a victim? You know, why is this happening to me? Versus, you know, well, you know, what can I do to change it? And you know, it is the power in me, or is it in other people? And yeah, you're absolutely right. In that situation, like for example, for me, well, I'd allowed it to happen. And the reasons I had allowed it to happen and get to that point was because of what I wanted out of it. My motivations for being in that relationship were wrong, right? And you know, all sorts of other things. And once I started picking that apart, and like you said, having that self-awareness, I realized that the control was in my hands. Yes, the blame was also on that other person for how they were treating me, but I'd allowed that to happen and enabled them to do that. And that was something that that was my fault. Right. So I had to take responsibility for my part of that, you know.
Yeah, I think, you know, we're just all so complex, and there's just so many factors that influence all of us at any one time. And
we're a mess, aren't we?
Well, I think we're like a good mess.
Yeah.
Hot mess.
I view it in the same way that because I'm fascinated by things to do with the cosmos and the universe and so on. And there's what always fascinates me about space, about the universe, is how it's seemingly a chaotic structure that over time has formed order, right? And that's the beautiful thing about physics and about the universe as a whole, is that, you know, through given enough time, every chaotic structure begins to form to become orderly. And then it seems also quite cyclical in that eventually order becomes chaos and so on and so on. And that's very much how I view a life.
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
that you know, throughout our life, you know, when you're first brought into the world, it's complete mayhem, right? Like we've got a newborn running around at the moment, and it's just like, but then you can start seeing the order come in. And it's like they're making sense of things, and there will be another shift and another shift and another shift as new chemicals are introduced into the body, either from consuming them or from, you know, hormones in the body, and as it changes, and there will be shifts in chaos and order as it goes throughout, and the experiences that they have, and that's just the way it is, right?
And we're constantly evolving, and we can choose to be conscious, and we can choose to stop being patterns, and we can choose to kind of move beyond the limitations that we might find ourselves in, or we can choose to stay stuck. And I think that's, you know, where choice comes in again. You know, the amazing thing about being human is we have free will, so we always have, you know, the ability to, you know, change things. And you look at some people out there, like some amazing people that have, you know, turned, you know, hideous circumstances into, you know, almost like unbelievable success because of their mindset, because of the choices that they made. And I think we should all be inspired by those, you know, role models among us, and, you know, within our networks, you know, outside of our networks. You know, there's plenty of people that you can look towards to think, wow, well, if they can do it, you know, I can do it. And
that's the optimistic way, not the pessimistic way of, if they can do it, why can't I do it?
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Not fair. Which seems to be an easier thing to look at.
So it's all about your mindset.
100%.
And it all comes back to, you know, that those two words, which I think are so important, is self-belief. Because if you believe in yourself, then you are capable of doing anything. You know, you have the power. But if you don't believe in yourself for whatever reason, it's time to start unpicking that and seeing, you know, where that stems from, and like how you can, you know, start to believe in yourself. You know, where can you become more confident? You know, where can you start? Like my journey of starting to feel better was just little steps. You know, what can I do? Because you forget yourself. I think when you're in those sort of, you know, depths of mental health despair and those challenges, you know, you even, you know, I just felt like I didn't even have a personality. Like I just didn't have a conversation with anybody. Like I had nothing to offer, and, you know,
you've lost yourself.
You lose this sense of self. And so it was like, for me, it was my journey back to self, of like, how can I find myself again? Like, you know, what do I actually like? What makes me smile? What makes me laugh? Like what do I enjoy? And then I set myself on a quest of, like, once a month I would go and do something on my own that I'd never done before, to try it out. Like some of the things I was like, oh God, this is hideous, this is like really uncomfortable, and other things I was like, I really like this and this is fun. And but every time I did it, I had to face my fears. You know, I had to face my fear of, you know, first of all, doing something on my own when I didn't feel confident, when I really did lack that kind of, you know, sense of self that I had before, and just, you know, seeing like every time I did it, it just got easier. And then, you know, before I knew it, I was feeling, you know, back to myself, but even better than how I felt before. I think it was, you know, this constant, you know, I think as founders, everybody can probably relate to this as well. It's like, you know, my brother has this tattoo, and I always thought, why did you get that? Like, it's fall down 7 times, get up 8. It's a Chinese proverb. And I always thought, it's such a shit tattoo. And now I'm like, I totally get it, because, you know, life is about constantly falling down and getting back up again. But, you know, the less time you spend laying down on the floor, you know, why did this happen to me? And, you know, things are unfair, but like, actually, okay, that didn't work, what can I do this time? And you know,
and it's very easy to be in that position on the floor, and just, if you know that you're going to constantly be falling down on the floor, to think, well, why bother standing up? I might as well just stay here, because if this is my natural state, life is trying to tell me this is where I belong. But that's not the point of life. Like,
no. And life isn't really telling, I think as well, it's about reframing it again. Life isn't really telling you that either. Life is telling you, life is saying, okay, well, you know, you need to grow, you need to evolve. Like, you're doing the same thing, expecting the same results. You know, you know, you're not, things aren't going to change if you do that, and that's why you keep falling over. You know, and so I think I really like to now, like, use that as my mantra. Like, if ever, you know, when things, I say if ever, when things happen that are challenging and that do knock you back a bit, I just sort of think to myself, yeah, fall down 7 times, get up 8. It's just it's just life, you know. And if you want to succeed and you want to, you know, create something that's going to have legacy, and you have a vision, you know, you can't just, you know, fall down at the first hurdle and not try again, because your vision's not that solid, is it? If you do that, you know, if you're wanting to do something that makes a difference to other people, particularly, I think that's something that really, for me, keeps me going. Is like, well, you know, this is bigger than me. It's not really about me. And you know, yeah, I've had a knock here or a knock there, and I just get back up and just keep going. And eventually I know that, you know, something will happen that will make me glad that I didn't give up.
I think there's definitely a lot of comfort to be found in altruism and stoicism as well, for people, things for people to look into. But like what you said about you forcing yourself to go off and do something that you've not done before and different, I think that from my understanding, there's been a lot of study on the psychology of that. I think it was originally based in people taking gap years and traveling and so on, and like the effects that it has on people's sort of psychology and even their sort of brain chemistry. And it's been proven without a shadow of a doubt that people being entered into uncertain situations is nothing but beneficial. Like, if you're afraid of public speaking, go and do some public speaking. You're afraid of socializing with people, force yourself to go and socialize. Doing things that we're afraid to do or uncomfortable with doing is proven without a shadow of a doubt to be incredibly beneficial. And it doesn't have to be you jump straight into the deep end. It could be, you know, you work your way up to it, you know, similar to what you mentioned about getting out of that sort of hole that you found yourself in. Same with me. It was like, sometimes you can't move because the journey seems so long, seems so far. And you're just like, well, there's no point. I'm never going to make it. Like, I'm never going to have that life I once had, or the life like that person or whatever. But like, that isn't the point. No. The point is like, at least take one positive step towards that. And still better than it was 5 minutes ago. And it's the same with this kind of thing. It's like, terrified to socialize with people, start small. You know, meet someone halfway, speak to them online. You know, there's always a way to get there, you know. And also, for full transparency, this is my therapy.
Oh,
like,
good.
Honestly, this is why I chose to do this. Is like you saying about going out there and doing different things. I have learned over the years what I need in order to thrive is stimulating conversation. That's what I need with different, exciting people. I was brought up in a household where, and I've said this several times on this show, I was very fortunate. I was brought up in quite a large household before my mum and dad split up. We were very, very lucky. And we always had at least 4 or 5 foreign students living with us at any one time. This was back home in Oxford. So at the dinner table would always be like 10 people, different cultures, different nationalities, different religions, different languages. And so for me, I was brought up on conversation as the way of, sharing ideas and exploring and all of the beautiful things that I think conversation brings. And I realized that some years ago, in order to come back to myself and who I am, I need to bring that back into my life. And just having quite a solitary life, working from home, running my own business, I need to find a way of doing that. And I was doing that with clients and meeting prospective clients and so on. I was like, I'm enjoying this. How can I keep doing this? And this is why the show was born. But really
amazing. I love that story, and I can really see that. You're very easy to talk to and very interested in other people.
It's a nice way of saying I don't shut up.
What I like,
what
I really resonate with you as well is that you're just really interested in finding out about people, and that really comes across. It's not like it's not contrived. It's very natural, and also
thank you. I appreciate it.
Makes people want to open up to you. But I was going to give 2 little gems there while you were talking. I just sort of thought of 2 things. One thing is to kind of try to base every day on how can I feel good today. So what can you do in that day, whether it's for half an hour, however in your schedule, but what can you do to feel good? So it's just one thing that you can promise yourself that you're going to feel good, and don't not do it. So promise yourself, right, I'm going to go for a walk after work, or I'm going to buy my favorite ice cream on the way home, or I'm going to make myself go to this, or whatever it is, but just stick to that promise. And if you can do that every day, again, within a very short amount of time, you're going to start to feel much better. And
I'm assuming within reason, right, in terms of like making sure we make healthy choices there.
Yeah, making sure we're making healthy choices.
Okay, good. I was going to say, otherwise, every morning, if you'd spoken to me when I was a teenager, it would have been right every morning. Right, I'm getting high. That makes me happy. I'm getting stoned.
And the other thing that I was going to say about fear is we should look at fear in a different way. See, I believe that fear is where the gold lies. So whatever you're afraid of, go towards. And when you go towards it and you do it, you will realize that it's actually something that you really enjoy, but you have had this kind of belief system or whatever it is around. I think it's also a telltale sign. Whatever you're afraid of is something you should be doing. I always think that whatever you're afraid of is something around to do with your life purpose. So it's really about like facing that fear. And you'll find that when you face that fear and you start to do those things, that resistance falls away in like other areas of your life, because that one thing that you've been fearful of has been the direction that you should be going. So that, that's just a little
I agree. It reframes fear as a whole and reframes anxiety, which is closely related to that. And that's the big issue, isn't it? Anxiety that underpins a lot of problems.
Yeah,
does for me.
Fear-based thinking thoughts are us projecting into the future of well, if I do this, and most of the time it's around us probably not feeling good enough to do whatever it is that we're afraid of doing. Like, I'm not qualified enough. I'm not
going to fail.
I'm going to fail. I don't know enough. Like, they're better than me, or they know more than me. And
I'm very well known for saying the sentence on this show, and also when speaking to people, that you should aim to be shit at something before aiming to be good at something.
Oh yeah, we're totally be shit at everything when we
and like that, and I think that's a pretty good aim to have. Like if you're going to do something for the first time, then just aiming, not like purposefully, but like the point being, just accept the fact that you're going to do it. But at least if you have the goal of aiming to be shit for it, then you've completed the first goal. It's like, yay, I was shit at this. It's like,
just think of it like a computer game, when you first pick up something and you're not very good at it, and you keep crashing on the first level, and then eventually a bit of practice makes perfect, and you get the hang of it. And I think just I think as well, recognizing perfectionism is such a joy hooverer, because nothing's going to be perfect, because my perception of perfection is going to be different from yours. So you know, I think we put so much kind of stuff on ourselves to be perfect, or society makes us believe that we've got to be perfect. And I think this is a lot around well-being as well, that how people don't want to speak up is because of, you know, all of this conditioning that we have. And, you know, especially in the workplace, it becomes, you know, magnified. So it's just sort of really around like checking in with yourself. Like, am I being a perfectionist here? Do I really need to spend another 3 hours doing this? Or is it actually okay now? And can I just, you know, deliver it? And not just okay, it's probably great, but you're thinking it needs to be different. So, you know, just get it out there, and, you know, learn. Everything's an experiment, and sometimes you're going to put something out there and it's going to be successful, and other times it might not be so successful, but that should never stop you from
and you do something often enough and it might very well get close to your idea of perfection, but it probably won't be initially, for sure.
Totally.
Very, very relevant thing to say, especially considering like the vast majority of the people that listen to this are startup founders, and you know, and in that situation, it's time isn't on your side. People ruminate for too long, they try and strive for perfection, and the winning combination is usually get it out, give it to people, get people using it, get people's, you know, response then. Because if, you know, that you can building something in a vacuum, coming up with a business idea in a vacuum, until you've actually gone out there and spoken to your prospective clients, pointless, completely pointless, as you know. So.
Yeah, totally. So just let go of that perfectionism, and again, when it comes to like what you're afraid of, just think, you know, a lot of that kind of projecting thought into the future and into the past, just, you know, it doesn't mean anything. It's just like, well, just try it. And, you know, I think meetups are really great to, you know, test out your fears or something like that, because you can go to something, you can, you know, face a fear that no one knows you've got a fear about. And then if you do something that you're, you know, say that you, I don't know, say it's a public speaking thing, or you're doing some improv, or, you know, you're one of your fears is doing stand-up comedy or something. Can you go to a thing and you say a really shit joke and you feel really humiliated? You never have to fucking go back there. Excuse me.
No, it's true. But also it's this perception that people care about us way more than we care about ourselves as well. Like, you know, the harsh reality is people don't really care. Like, you know, if you tell a shit joke and the crowd goes boo, they forgot about it 5 minutes later. They've moved on with their lives.
It's yesterday's newspaper,
right? Because everyone's focused on themselves. So, totally. So, you know, the people aren't that interested as much as we are about ourselves. Like, that's an important perception to have. It's like, you know, we spend more energy and attention on ourselves than anyone else. Like, people are all doing the same thing. Like, it's the same thing I tell people about putting content out there who are hesitant. Like, I work with some founders who I say, you know, you need to start posting, you need to start building some presence online. And I'm like, oh, but I don't know what to put out there. So it doesn't matter. No one gives a shit. Just start. Like, you know, it doesn't matter if it's crap. What's going to happen? They'll look at it, they'll go, oh, that's a bit crap, and then carry on with the rest of their lives. That's it. Yeah, that's the worst that's going to happen.
Yeah, you know? Totally. Yeah, so don't let that. And I think also when we face the fear and it happens, then it's gone. You know, right? Like, oh, well, that happened. It wasn't that bad. I'm still alive. I'm still me. You know. Yeah. And tomorrow's another day.
Yeah, we make big deals out of things, so we mountains out of molehills all the time. Well, look, we're wrapping up, and ordinarily at the end, I would have asked something for you to say a few words on something, but you already just did it, actually, which was if you had a couple of tips to give out there in a way, but really quickly, I guess, in 1 minute, because I do have to jump into another meeting in a moment. But maybe one last final thought from you. We talk more generally about people and how they can deal with those things, which is what you just did there. But very specifically with companies, what are some, you know, simple things that you think that they should be implementing ASAP in order to create a better working environment for their employees?
Oh, that off the top of my head.
Yeah, maybe just one really big one that they can, maybe it's an actionable thing, or two.
Yeah, just ask your people how they are.
Simple. Ask them how they are.
How they are, and what you can do to make their work better.
Fair enough. And actually give a shit about the answer, I suppose.
Yeah, and actually action the answer. Don't just ask. Right. Like, okay, cool, yeah, whatever.
Like the typical British introduction, like, how are you, when you really don't care. Like,
ask with meaning, and then, you know, deliver on
Yeah.
what you're being told.
And listen with intent.
Listen with intent.
Yeah. No, good advice. Good advice. And I wish we had a bit longer to delve into that a bit more, but maybe we'll have to do a part 2 where we can get into that in a bit more detail. Good excuse to do that. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed talking with you. And yeah, by the time this releases, it's going to be in a little while. It won't be soon, but by the time this is released, hopefully we'll have spoken a bit more and caught up. And yeah, I wish you all of the continued success with the business.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Greg. And yeah, I look forward to chatting to you again soon.
Likewise. All right. Take care. Have a wonderful week.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening and/or watching. Please like and subscribe and join in the conversation in the comments below.